Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we bring awesome guests to talk about how can we generate cash flow, how can we invest in real estate, how can we actually build this passive income that gets us to the time freedom point. And one of these extra special guests we have is Tom Zeeb today. He is a world traveler and expert. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Axel. Good to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for making the time. And before we go into what you do on a regular basis in the space, tell us a little bit the origin story, so to speak. How did you get to what you do these days?
That's interesting. I was stuck in a 9-to-5 job that I was fairly miserable in, and I'm sure that's something a lot of people can relate to. Right. And I wanted to find a way out, but I had no idea how. And I didn't own any real estate. I had never really thought about being a real estate investor. And then as I sat there and looked at this mountain of debt that I was suffocating under, and I wasn't sure what to do, I said, well, let's go on vacation. Let's just spend more money, because which might have been exactly how I got myself into those problems to begin with. And on this vacation, which was a kind of far-flung adventure trip to India, I was in the whitewater rafting in the Ganges River, and I couldn't quite stay on the boat. At one point, I flew off in a Class 5 rapid, and I got sucked underwater. And as I was kind of blacking out and unsure what was going to happen, I rather than be scared, I got angry. Axel, I was suddenly, I was mad. I was mad that I had never really done anything. All I did was get into debt. It was an unsustainable lifestyle. And I said, man, when I get out of here, things are going to be different. The thing is, I had no idea how. So I got home and I was still stuck and I was still trapped, and I couldn't leave the job and I couldn't do anything I wanted to do. Couldn't even go on another trip now because I was deeper and deeper in debt. And then a friend handed me a copy of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Okay.
And that book made me understand that there was a way out. That way out was through real estate investing, which I had no clue how to do. So then I had to set my mind about how to do that. And eventually, after getting punched between the eyes a number of times, I figured it out, and it saved me.
And how long ago did you get the book?
Oh, that was 2001. So
okay.
It's been a long time, 20-something years.
Right, understand. And so you said, it wasn't a success story right off the bat. It's one of those, overnight success that took 20 years to develop or something like that. Can you describe for our audience a little bit some of the things that you tried that you found didn't work so well, and then maybe transition in the things that you do now that do work?
Sure. Well, the first thing I did was not knowing anything. Rich Dad said, hey, buy rental properties. You have to have passive income. Of course, I was so broke. I mean, literally broke as a joke. I was $113,000 in debt. I'm 113 grand in the hole. And for some reason, I thought buying a 6-unit building as my very first real estate deal ever, not even owning my own property, somehow buying a 6-unit property in New York City that was going to cash flow $800, like somehow that was going to solve my problems. So I was setting myself up for disaster from the beginning. And that property was nothing but a disaster. I mean, even down to one of the tenants smacking my sister's head against the wall when she was trying to collect some rent. Nobody was paying. And I had basically taken a bad situation and made it worse.
Okay, understood. And that's obviously a lesson learned that, you can't just run into any situation, I believe. It doesn't matter whether it's real estate investing or pretty much anything without developing some expertise, or, which is kind of what I'm doing, is offering people the opportunity to piggyback on what I learned. And I'm sure you're willing to help other people if they come and say, hey, Tom, I want to do this thing that you have been doing. Teach me the things that are working and keep me away from the things that don't, I would assume. But one thing that I find fascinating, because I've heard that story so many times, is that before getting into kind of what I call value investing, people accumulated large amounts of debt. Why do you think that happened?
It's a trap. I think it's a trap set for us. Everybody wants things. You want a great lifestyle. You want glamorous living. You want good food. You want cool toys. Except a lot of times those are a lot more expensive than you can afford. Or
Right.
you come out of college with a ton of debt. You don't really know what to do. It's going to take you years to pay off that debt as it is, and you just keep going into more debt. And it's debt that we can't escape from. Compound interest is working against you. And so I think there's the desire to have things that you then feel entitled to is actually hurting you and holding you back, because if you keep digging yourself deeper in the debt, it's going to take even longer to be able to get out of it. So I fell into the classic trap.
Yeah, understood. And that's actually, I want to say this because you asked me before we started recording, where I'm originally from, and I've never hidden that I'm originally from Germany and then came to the US when I was like early 30s. And there is a distinct cultural difference there when it comes, at least for my generation. I don't want to necessarily say that that's still the case, but what always struck me is this desire to get stuff. And I mean, you mentioned it, that was kind of like part of the reason, but what, in your opinion, having worked your way through and out of it, where does that desire come from?
Materialism. I mean, I suppose at some base level it's sinful, and we can head in that direction. I suppose it's also that materialism is, some of it is what Americans would call keeping up with the Joneses. You're trying to outpace your neighbor. The neighbor's named Jones next door. You want to show off, you want to have things, you think you deserve all the fun and the good things in life, even though you haven't done the work to deserve it yet, but you're entitled to it. There's a lot of things. I think it's all throughout popular culture, and growing up under that kind of popular culture, seeing that in every TV show, seeing that in every movie, and that kind of surface level, very shallow materialism, it sets in and takes hold.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Materialism is probably one fitting term. I think the other part that I have observed when asking questions to people who, for me as somebody from Germany, when I first came and I went to Texas, so, where everything is a little bigger, they had these big houses with 2 and 3 car garages, but the cars were all parked in front. So, like I was very grateful to be invited, to dinner and talk and being shown around and kind of getting a taste, also learning English, because I initially thought they had like a blankie in their mouth or something that wasn't the Queen's English that I had had learned in school. But when I asked them, why is it that your cars are out on the driveway when I see that you have these huge garages? And they said, well, because there's so much stuff in the garage that we can't really fit the car.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to touch on that real quick, because when we in our community talk about investing in something that holds value, that is protected from inflation, that is being paid off by tenants, that is allowing somebody to live a reasonable life. I mean, obviously they might be using some of the space to put stuff in as well. But those kind of aspects is really a significant shift in the mindset. And I'm really a little bit curious what you in your experience have been doing or have been trying to do to get people to kind of shift away from this, what you call materialism.
Yeah, that's fighting a major cultural tide. But I think there's a point where it's getting people to come to an understanding. There's nothing wrong with the toys if you're going to use them, and there's nothing wrong with the toys if you can afford them. Why don't you make it a reward for having done something good in business, done something good financially, by putting down a good financial base for you and your family, and then reward yourself. Don't take the reward first, right? You don't eat dessert before the main course, because there's not as much nourishment in the dessert as there is in the main course. And so I think it's trying to get people to put things in the right order and exercise a little bit of self-restraint.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think one thing that we are also transitioning to, that I'm at least hopeful for future generations, is this kind of fundamental entrepreneurialism that was also triggered a little bit during the pandemic, or rekindled during the pandemic, you know, even if it's called gig economy or whatever you want to call it, to say, okay, so somebody could, at that lake that I like to drive to, have like a rental for jet skis, or a rental for boats, or a rental for whatever. So these toys, if you want to call them that, get way more usage than I could ever fathom unless I would give up my job, right? I
Yes.
think there is a hope in that direction to say, okay, well, it doesn't really make sense to own this stuff, or would it make more sense to just drive with my car to the place by the lake and rent one for an hour or 2 or 3, and, you know, let other people's rent it for the rest of the day, and make it worthwhile that way, instead of having it sitting in my garage and other stuff like it. Now, what I want to transition to in our conversation, now that we've talked a little bit of, you know, the distinction between people that end up with a lot of debt because they think they need to have all this stuff, to seeing the value in certain things that increase in value and retain their value and stuff like that. I saw in my preparation that you do quite a bit of this remotely, or from not necessarily just being stuck in one location. Can we talk a little bit? How do you do this? How did that develop, and what can others maybe learn from that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's developed from a passion for traveling and exploring the world, and, you know, going on whitewater rafting trips, climbing a mountain, you know, being out on the water, exploring different cultures and countries, and eating the food, and enjoying photography in those kinds of places, and wanting to have that lifestyle before I was successful in real estate investing, and then using real estate investing to actually fund it and make it so that it was feasible. The problem was, well, what if I want to do that and the deal hasn't closed yet? Because what I started finding was that real estate deals never close on time. It's
Oh,
the most
really?
amazing thing.
That's
Nothing
completely
ever
new
runs
to
according
me.
to schedule. Yeah.
That must be something just for Tom's. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, I mean,
I honestly can't remember even a single one that actually closed on the projected date.
correct. They never do. I don't think I've ever had one either on the
Yeah.
originally projected date. Never.
Yeah.
And so what would happen sometimes was I'd have a trip planned in advance, you know, leave the day after the deal,
Right.
but the deal didn't close. So having to get used to doing things remotely. Or the other thing was I'd be on a trip, but I didn't want business back home to fall apart. I still, you know, you have to keep your pipeline moving. My marketing was automated. I automated it early on and got it moving. So leads would still come in while I was traveling. And so, you know, nowadays, particularly post-COVID, everyone, oh, you can jump on Zoom and you can, you know, manage your email. Everyone's got a watch that does their email, and you know, it's easy. You can find Wi-Fi everywhere. I was doing this in 2001, 2002, 2003. It was a lot more difficult back then. I mean, I remember walking down the streets of Manhattan with a laptop that was big and heavy, because that's how laptops were.
Yeah.
Right? Early versions of laptops. And I had a PC MCIA card for Wi-Fi. It slid into the side, and then there's this giant antenna sticking out the side of it. And I would walk up and down the streets sniffing for wireless networks. And very few people had them, but when I could find one, then I was able to upload and download my email, because it wasn't that you had Wi-Fi everywhere. And the best thing was, back then, putting a password on it was so complicated. Most people left their wireless networks open.
Right. Yeah.
So I could walk up and down the street, and I would, you know, I remember an early trip to Rome, and I would have to take this heavy laptop, you know, in a bag, and I would walk across Rome to an easy internet cafe. They're the same company that did EasyJet. They had these internet cafes. And of course, if you wanted to use your own computer, you had to go down in the basement and plug a cable into it. I mean, think about it. Most laptops, you can't even plug a cable in anymore, you know, without the old-fashioned Ethernet cable.
Yeah, I know.
You know, plug it in, go through this complicated protocol.
Lucky they're too thin today to actually make the room for the cable.
They're too thin and too nice. And so wireless wasn't that available. And yet I wanted to be able to upload and download my email, because I was running my business and managing my business on that. It was also very important back then to not tell anyone I was out of the country, or out of the state, or out of town, because people assumed if you were out of town, you were out of touch. And I never wanted that to happen. So I would generally never tell people I was traveling or where I was. Of course, that was a lot easier before social media because it wasn't like you were posting where you were or checking in somewhere. And so you could be anonymously away and no one knew the difference. Even my faxes, remember faxing? Even my faxes came in electronically and were sent to me email as an attachment in PDF. So I was able to handle things. And if I need, I would print them out, sign them, and then rescan them. Nowadays, you just pull out an electronic stylus. But there were all these different ways of doing deals remotely. And if I needed to have eyes and ears on the ground, I sent somebody else. I would usually call one of my buyers. If I was tending the wholesale, I would send one of my buyers and say, hey, can you go take a look at 123 Main Street? I've got it under contract. Can you go see it, take a whole bunch of photos, and I'll give you first dibs. If you want it, let me know it's yours. If not, I'll put it out to everybody else. And that was kind of the payment in return, was that they would get first dibs at it. And if not, hey, I'll buy you lunch when I'm back in town. You know, I can't get over there right now.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. Now, the one thing that I'm curious about, because I know you're absolutely right that it has evolved much further, not just as far as internet access, but also all the tools and stuff that can be used, both software and other tools. The one thing that we have in our community still been running into, and I'm kind of secretly praying that you have a solution for that, is the actual closing thing. I mean, there are remote notaries, but when you go international, you mentioned that you were on a trip to Europe just recently. Have you found any way that you can basically do the final step? All the other stuff I think we all can figure out by now, but that final step of basically doing the closing, the notary stuff, and sometimes, I mean, money stuff has gotten a little better. It just, wire transfer international is still sometimes an adventure, but the closing is still the one thing that I wonder if you have found a way to get that handled.
Yeah. So if I need to have things notarized, I have used, it's funny, in the last couple of months, I've used an online notary twice when I've been somewhere else far away. If I'm in the United States, generally the settlement company will send a notary to me wherever I'm at.
Right. Yeah, if you're in country, they can just, any bank or lender can just say, okay, we take a notary in Sarasota, or we take one in Dayton, Ohio, or whatever.
Yeah, they send a mobile notary. We meet in the hotel lobby. Everything's done. Cool.
I've had like when you were hiking in Austria, and
yes. So when that's come up, I've used online notaries. Okay. So it's kind of a cool setup. They using their software, their app. I take a picture of my driver's license front and back. I submit it. I go through the other verification process, basically just, say who I am, what I am, taking a picture, all on the app. And then we pop online and there's a live notary who just asks me the same kinds of questions. I've sent the documents to them electronically, and then they sign them and submit them, all of it online. Now, what's interesting, Axel, is it seems like a great smooth system. Of the twice that I've done it in the last few months, one time it was accepted, no problem. The other time it was initially accepted and then later rejected, which I thought odd. Why would they? Now, they did the deal anyway, but they made me go back and sign again. Of course, at this point, I was back stateside. I was back in America, so I just had them send a notary to me and did it the old school classic way, which there was never any clear reason why they rejected it. But I'm imagining, just like a lot of other things that were unpopular when they first came out, the acceptance of that is going to go up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I'm kind of hopeful, knowing that it's not quite there yet, is, and I hope I'm not triggering people, but I really think one of the solutions that's going to come is blockchain, right? And the reason I'm saying this is people almost instantaneously, when you use the term, associate it with crypto somehow. But really, when you go one level deeper, I had to learn this in one of my consulting deals that I'm still doing on the side. It is basically just a ledger, literally like an accounting tool, where any finished transaction is basically there forever and can be seen from both sides and cannot be changed. Right. So if you take that concept into mind and say, okay, I send you money or you send me money, and we're using the blockchain, and as soon as we hit the button and say transaction is done, and you confirm, hit the button, yes, it's done, that transaction is now forever registered in the ledger forever and ever and cannot be changed. It is, everybody can see it worldwide, instant, like in milliseconds, but you cannot change it anymore. And I think something like that is basically what lenders and bankers and title companies and all these entities are really only looking for. It's not really that they necessarily want to see your driver's license or my passport or any other thing. Or I'm also hoping that the blockchain will help us avoid these 150-page closing documents and stuff. you know,
would that be nice?
The point is to be able to say we can verify on both ends that we agree, similar to like you sitting in front of someone and signing it with your signature, or there used to be some ideas about fingerprints and so forth. That I think is the technology that would be available worldwide, and anybody can accept the same standard. It's just going to probably take couple more years until we really get there.
I'll tell you, interestingly, one of the things that has really smoothed my operation is the last few years that I've been using a digital stylus on my, I'm a Microsoft user, so I have a Microsoft Surface is my main machine, because then it's all in one, tablet, laptop, everything's there. I can do everything. It's kind of lowest common denominator. It works. Well, since it has a screen I can write on, I use the stylus and I just sign my contracts direct. So I no longer need to print them out, sign them, and scan them back. I can just sign it electronically. Now, it's clear it's with the stylus, but it's also clear that it's in my handwriting. And that has, I don't get challenged on it. Now, final documents or something that needs to be notarized, that's different. But the rest of the time, it's my handwriting, it's my signature. It's not really any different than if I did it on paper. And that's solved my problem probably 95% of the time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think the combination of what you just said and my point about blockchain, where you, after you did it, like let's say you did something electronically with your stylus, if it were stored on the blockchain, it could never be changed. Because part of the reason that people are paranoid, like what happens if the paper gets lost by the notary, right? Then you're screwed again. Stuff like that, So
it's there and it's there forever. I think you need to develop that, because whoever does will make a good fortune.
And that is something for more like a 22-year-old, not for me. But maybe if somebody is inspired, it's like one of these, like I've heard in the last couple of years several times when they do these kind of like investor calls with Elon Musk. Right? And he says, okay, well, everybody should get into lithium mining. It's basically a license to print money. And he said that over and over and over for 3 years, and nobody did it. And now they started to do their own thing, So there are these opportunities in the world. It just needs somebody to pick them up. Okay, cool. Well, so what are some of the things, as we're coming to the end of the show for today, that you see happening in real estate? Because I'm sure with, like we have high mortgage interest rates, we have people saying the real estate market will be bad. I keep saying you have to differentiate between commercial and residential. It's a huge difference. Where does Tom Zeeb see things go?
Yeah, well, as a real estate investor, I see things getting better, not worse. So I don't want this to sound too crass, but I welcome a market slowdown. I welcome a market tumble, because that tends to be the retail market. And when things get more difficult to sell, right? A few years ago, everything would sell instantly. You put it on the open market and it would sell within 3 minutes. You'd have 17 different offers. Well, if that's slowing down now and it's not as easy, then when people get into trouble with their property, so they become motivated sellers, which is my specialty, they now have one less option. And that big option to just list it and see how much they can get, when that dries up and goes away, they need me. They need a creative real estate investor more than ever. So I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm happy too. And I think part of it is the much larger crowd that is fundamentally interested in purchasing real estate is the novice person. And I'm not saying this in a negative way. It's just normal that, okay, they bought a property at some point and maybe 7 years later, they want to upgrade to a larger property because they grew the family by a couple of kids. And that's the second time in their life that they do a deal, rather than like you and me. So by them basically being stuck in these nice low interest mortgages that they all signed for in the last 10 years, and being in that sense not really interested to participate in the market because they know their monthly rate would double for the same house, so it makes no sense. That I think is a huge benefit. The other part that I'm kind of curious about is I predict that the notion that, or let me put it the other way, internationally, I think we are the only ones in the US where you can basically at any given time go to your lender and say, hey, by the way, I got the money to pay you off and I get my next set of money from somewhere else. And there's no restriction, right? Like in Canada, for example, you can lock in for 5 years. In Germany, you can lock in up to 10 years. If you do anything within that lock-in period, they literally fine you. And not just a little bit, like, I mean, several percentage points on your whole loan amount for paying off early, right? So I think what you and I and others in our industry are thinking about is it's a good time for the reasons that you mentioned, but it's also a good time because we can say if a deal works fundamentally now, in 3 or 4 years, when we're back to something reasonable, we refi it, especially like when you do value investing and want to keep the properties long term, it's only going to get better. Yeah. Right? If it works now, it will work even better in the future. And but that only works when we, as long as we have permission to say, okay, I pay off this 30-year mortgage and I get myself a new, much cheaper 25-year mortgage or so at any point we want to. So I think people are not very aware that we are pretty much the only country in the world that I have found where that is possible.
It's a good thing for us. I mean, it keeps it, we're not trapped in, and we can stay responsive and stay nimble, and that's important. So I mean, if you're somewhere else, then you obviously got to play by what those rules are. If you're in America, we get to play by our rules and always know what the rules are and understand how you can maximize them to your personal benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm always secretly hoping that we have maybe some international investors who listen to us and say, oh, wow, they can actually do that and maybe get in touch. And so if they want to get in touch with me, they probably know how. But how do they get in touch with you?
You can find me, best way is through my websites. Go to tomzeeb.com, Tom, Z as in zebra, B as in boy.com. There's a whole podcast there that's primarily focused on negotiating. And then I have an enormous amount of video trainings as well at my other website, tractionrealestatementors.com.
Yeah, the stuff on YouTube that I saw is actually really cool, and you have lots and lots and lots and lots of it. So I can only encourage people to take a look at it. So as we come to the end, I always ask the same 2 questions, not related to real estate or investing, to all our guests. So the first one is, if you could meet anybody, who would it be and why?
I would choose, kind of a silent mentor of mine, even though he died before I was born. I would choose Winston Churchill.
Okay.
Purely for the, I mean, for the humor, for the ability to do a million things at once, for maintaining grace and control under absurd amounts of pressure. I've always gotten a lot out of, I've gotten a lot of business lessons out of reading his books. Any
specific thing you would ask him?
I don't want to make it sound like, ask for a tip. Hey, Winston, what would you do to keep everything moving? Even on the, because I think some of it's more complicated than that. No, I'm not sure there'd be something specific I'd ask so much as just watch. I would love to see the man in action and watch how all that had to go down, because I think you can catch a lot from people, even less from what they say, but watching what they do.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of truth to that. If I had the opportunity to ask people like Churchill or similar people, I would really want to know, how do they stay convinced and convicted to their beliefs and to their vision? Common current person that I would love to talk to would be Elon Musk. And okay. And in the context we were just talking about, for me, there were so many cases, where I see some article that is complete bullcrap, right? Like, or some accusation for some business transaction, or some really nasty kind of comment based on always lying and never delivering anything and stuff. And I'm sometimes seeing this and I'm saying, this guy is basically being accused and put through the ringer and under a microscope all the time. and it seems like Teflon, right? Like it's just similarly, they were so convicted and so convinced about what they wanted and why they wanted it and where they wanted to go, that everything else was just noise that they somehow found a way to tune out, you know, and I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with you. The ability to focus through the noise, put on the blinders and focus on what you need to have happen. There's something about a strong leader and an opinionated leader, whether you like or hate the opinion, right? You can agree with it or not, but you're usually drawn to that strong of a leader. And I think that's something I'd like to see in action from those leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be a totally different podcast if we were to reflect on how long have we missed a really strong leader in the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we, oh no, we shouldn't go there, but there's a last question I ask everybody. If you had a time machine, Tom, and you could go anywhere, you can go there, you know what you know, where would you go and why?
The 1940s had an elegance to it. Now, it might just be because I like old movies. So, you know, it'd be great to run around with, you know, Cary Grant and Humphrey Bogart, and it would certainly be nice to run around with Grace Kelly. But yeah. I think it just there was an easy, effortless elegance, something that I think is particularly in America, right? Things have gotten very casual. Last few years, everything's casual. It'd be nice to, I don't know, dress up a little bit and go out and have a good time. You know, all those years where everyone talked about casual Fridays, I used to say, hey, what about formal Thursdays? We should have formal Thursdays. Everybody should wear a dinner jacket, tuxedo on a Thursday, and then whatever. Then you can wear shorts and a t-shirt on a Friday. But everybody wears t-shirts now. I'm even guilty of it half the time. But it's nice to, I don't know. I would love to see a more formal time. And to me, the 40s seem to be the pinnacle of that, at least in the semi-modern era.
Yeah, absolutely. And I for me, it's more a matter of professionalism, right? Like whether formal, yes, it comes probably across in a sense formal, but I think it's a matter of how do you demonstrate professionalism. Now with Grace Kelly, Monaco is not the worst place to hang out, right?
No, well, exactly.
And you couldn't run around like a slump there if you go to Monaco, especially if you want to hang out wanted to hang out with her. So a great choice. I can kind of envision that, you know, among the boats and with the palace and all that kind of stuff. So. Right, Tom, it was great. So tell us again one more time at the end here, what is the right place for people to go and find you?
TomZeeb.com or TractionRealEstateMentors.com.
All right. Well, it was a great pleasure. Thank you for making the time for our audience, and maybe we can do it again at some point.
Sounds good. Thanks, Axel. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.